Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is an odd movie. Not to say the others made much sense if you try to connect their stories either, but Part 2 is in a league of its own in terms of sheer incoherence to the rest of the series. For instance, it's the only one with a male main protagonist. That's something not usually done much in slasher movies. Most of the time it's a damsel in distress, fighting for her life and sometimes for her chastity against some evil guy who just wants her dead. It was a change that Robert Englund is said to have disliked because it effectively removes most of Freddy's threatening capability as a sexual predator. So instead of a well-grounded teenage girl using her know-how to outwit an otherworldly being, in this movie we get a teenage boy with an effeminate scream and gratuitous shots of man-ass. Which leads me to the first discrepancy. It's a well-known fact that the second Nightmare on Elm Street was written with a gay subtext. So much so that the gaydar is going crazy. For those of you who already know the premise, take this plot and try it on for size.
Try it on for size.
Hey, I just said that. The main character, Jesse, a new kid in town, becomes inhabited by Freddy, a repressed entity that lives inside of him, forcing Jesse to go to S&M bars and subsequently to a locker room where he strips his gym teacher, ties him up, and whips him with towels until he dies, but not before pelting him with balls. The police bring Jesse back home to his timid mother and his emotionally crippled father, who never saw eye to eye with him. Mom says it's just a phase. Dad says he needs discipline.
What that boy needs is a good goddamn kick in the butt. That's what he needs.
But there's a girl in the mix named Lisa. They hit it off one night, and things start to get hot and heavy until that evil entity appears again. So in a fit of terror and confusion, Jesse rushes to his friend Grady's house to spend the night.
Something is trying to get inside my body.
Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana. And you want to sleep with me.
But in the wee hours of the morning, his inner demon comes out again and kills Grady. Maybe with a hint of AIDS? So now it's up to Lisa, and only Lisa, to help Jesse overcome the darkness that dwells within him. After an impassioned kiss, Jesse is finally free of Freddy's hold and can now love her unconditionally. Then they go home, he lays her down, and they... So yeah, it was an undertone that was kinda subtle in the mid-80s, but has become blatantly overt over time.
We made Nightmare 2 absolutely clueless.
I'm absolutely sure there's not one moment that I remember that it was discussed.
I never saw it.
I didn't get it.
If you're called the Homo Nightmare on Elm Street on the net by a million prepubescent boys, then a bunch of grown men had to know what they're doing.
Don't get me wrong, a movie with a gay undertone isn't the reason I'm making this video. It wasn't even that out of the ordinary in the mid-80s. It's been implied in other films as far back as even the 40s. There's actually a documentary about this very movie coming out in late 2016 starring Mark Patton, the guy who played Jesse. I just think it's interesting how subject matter that's so obvious today can fly under the radar of people even a few decades back. Like in Creature from the Black Lagoon, when a scientist callously tosses her cigarette into the Gillman's home. Nothing back then, but today it really sends a message of nature's fragility and the adverse effects man can unknowingly have on their own ecosystem. An unintentional message of nature's fragility and the adverse effect man can unknowingly have on their own ecosystem, but a message nonetheless. All the Gillman wanted to do was relax in his dimly lit hovel, but man just barges in and dumps their garbage on his head. I don't blame him for slashing some faces. But I digress. My beef with Nightmare 2 is the fact that Freddy isn't Freddy. You may be asking what I mean by that, so I say, answer me this. What are Freddy's characteristics? He lives in a dream world where he is invincible, but is mortal in the real world. He seeks revenge on the children of parents who burned him alive. He doesn't possess people. Remember these rules, because you sure won't learn them from this movie. Let's start with that first one. Freddy lives in a dream world that is filled with as much surreal potential as the director's imagination can conceive. But Part 2 went with a dream world that seems to consist entirely of factories and a vacant school with out-of-place red lighting. Freddy is the invincible incubus of the subconscious plane, so he would have no interest in going into the real world, right? Right? This movie would have you believe otherwise. Freddy just literally bursts out of people's chests like those things from Alien, whatever they're called. And of course, in the real world, his mortality allows him to shake off a stab wound. He also can't stalk or teleport in the real world either, but... Yep, this is the scene that allegedly made Wes Craven throw his hands up in disbelief. Freddy, out in the open, terrorizing dozens of teenagers, none of which are the Elm Street kids that he's sworn to murder. Well, maybe this guy, but they never give it any lip service. So after being shot at by the wobbly gun of Lisa's father, he disappears through a makeshift hole that he burns into the bushes. I'm just wondering why Freddy didn't do this in Freddy vs. Jason if he wanted to come back so bad.
I can't come back if nobody remembers me. I can't come back if nobody's afraid. Make them remember.
Come to think of it, I'm not even sure what Freddy's ultimate goal was in this movie. He talks about special work they've got to do, but that doesn't result in much more than him killing a couple of random people and crashing a high school party. Then we have the third discrepancy. Freddy doesn't possess people. I mean, he's made a guy sleepwalk off of a bell tower like a marionette, and one time he lived inside of a person's head, but he never directly controlled anybody internally. Except for that super stoned guy in Freddy vs. Jason. He got possessed, and look how it turned out for him. And I thought Jay from Jay and Silent Bob could handle his weed. But there's one last thing that definitely... Wait a minute. That's not Jay. But there's one last thing that's definitely the biggest offender on my list. Freddy's been killed in a multitude of ways, and I think only he can say it best.
First, they tried burning me. Then, they tried burying me. But this is my favorite. They even tried holy water.
Some pretty cool ways for a supervillain to die, huh? But you might have noticed that he makes no mention of Nightmare 2. And you want to know why? Because in Part 2, Freddy is killed by the power of love.
I love you, Jesse!
The power of love! I guess it wouldn't sound quite as epic if he had said,
First, they tried burning me. Then, they tried burying me. They even tried holy water.
And one time I melted after a girl kissed me.
Although it may seem otherwise, I actually like this movie. But as far as I'm concerned, it's more like a decent generic slasher than a part of the Nightmare series. It could be anyone else in that stalker role and it would have been just as good. Well, almost anyone.
And his name is John C.
In fairness, there was only one other movie at the time and no real precedent yet on what the franchise should be. The director of Part 2 has even said that he felt no compunction to follow the template of the original, but if it's not broke, why try to fix it?